The raven came at dusk, a black fleck against a bruised sky. It beat hard against the wind that blew off the shivering sea and found the rookery by stubborn instinct, dropping from the eaves like a stone when its strength gave out. The bird was all bone and ink, its feet raw, its message bound to the leg with frayed twine. It pecked Maester Aemon once before surrendering to his old hands. The parchment smelled of wax and road dust and a city that believed itself eternal. When the words were read aloud in the common hall, no one spoke. The fire hissed and settled. Men with frost-burned hands held their bowls of stew and forgot to eat. Aemon's voice was softer than a prayer and harder than an axe. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, had been executed on the steps of the Great September of Baelor by order of King Joffrey Baratheon. Jon stood very still and felt the world drain of sound. There was no shout of rage in him, no collapse, no flicker of tears. He remembered his father's voice on a summer road, the patient way he had taught a boy to sit a saddle. He remembered a man who had spared a deserter the shame of fear by doing what the law and mercy required. Winter is coming, his father had said often, but never as a threat, as a truth. Ghost pressed a white flank to Jon's knee and made a low, uncertain sound. Someone swore, then stifled it at the end, as if cursing in the sight of the dead. Jeor Mormont sat rigid as he had sat in the snow across a dozen battles, his dark eyes moving over the faces of his men. When he looked at Jon, he said nothing. The hall held its breath and then remembered itself in the clatter of spoons and the slow scrape of benches as the men rose and drifted away like a fleet of small, stunned ships knocking together in a harbor. Outside, the wind set its teeth to the wall. The torches threw ragged light into the courtyard where the shadows were already long. Jon went out without cloak or gloves and stood looking across the frozen sweep of the new gift. The lamps of the village guttered far below. In that moment, the wall seemed not a work of hands, but a cliff of night that had waited for this hour to reveal itself as an altar. His breath smoked. Ghost's breath smoked. Nothing else moved. Robb, he thought, and the name was a chain closing around his chest. He saw his brother across the snows of memory. His laugh, his temper, the way he had trained until the blisters broke and broke again. Robb would be in the Riverlands, the banners up, the great Jon bellowing, men bridling their horses on cold grass while hornets drank from craws of beer. Robb would be a sword in the dark, but all swords snapped if they were driven too far and too fast. Winterfell would stand hollow if no Stark went home to fill it. Bran and Rickon were there, small as candles in the warrens of stone. Behind him, the old man's step was slow but unerring. "You will leave," Aemon said, and it was not a question. Jon did not answer. The wind pushed against him, a hand that would not take no for an answer. He thought of vows spoken, chosen, binding. He thought of a gallows set upon steps of shining white, and of the man who had cut a deserter's head clean so the man's fear should be short. Aemon came to stand beside him, the blind eyes milky as winter milk. "You have known since I read the words," the maester said. A man often hears his own decision most clearly when it comes from another's mouth. It is an old trick. Jon swallowed. "If I leave, they will call me deserter." "They will be right," Aemon said gently, "as they would have been right to call me oathbreaker when I chose age instead of duty. We are men, Jon Snow. The oaths bind what is in us to be bound. But there are cords that run deeper than speech. Blood, love, the words we tell ourselves in the long night when there is no one to overhear and call us liars." Aemon's breath came thin. "I can only tell you this. Every path is a hunger. You must decide which hunger you will feed." Ghost's ears went forward. Somewhere below, a gate creaked and slammed. A scuffle of boots, the sound of Sam dropping something metal in the yard. A stammered apology. "What would you have me do?" Jon asked, and hated himself for the boy's petition in it. "What you will do," Aemon said. That night Jon rolled his few things in a dark cloak, took Longclaw from its rack, and went to the stables where the horses breathed their warm sweet stink into the hay. He saddled a rangy mare that took the bit with a tilt of the head, stroked her neck, and led her by the bridle to the postern gate. His friends found him there. Sam with his hands clasped, Gren with his jaw set, PYP with a look like mischief trying to be sorrow. "We could say you went north," PYP offered in a whisper that sounded like snow on slate. "We could say you chased a rumor of wildlings and never came back." Gren shook his head. "We'll say nothing," he said flatly. "If anyone asks, we were too drunk to stand." "Do you think you're the first man to go home when home calls?" Sam asked, and his smile was a ragged little lantern in his face. "The wall's tall, John, but it is not taller than love. I'll keep your secret as well as I keep any, which is to say, not well, but with my whole heart." John wanted to laugh, but the sound broke into something else. He clasped their shoulders one by one, last of all Sam's. "I'll write," he said, "if I can." "Don't," Sam said fiercely. "Let us lie with honest lies." He swung into the saddle. Ghost slid like a shadow to his stirrup. The gate creaked. The mare danced as the wind slapped her flank. They went out into the cold like a nail into flesh. He rode by night and by bad roads, keeping to hedges, fording black streams that took his feet from the stirrups and put ice in his boots. Twice he saw a patrol of rangers on the horizon like crows strung along a fence. Once he passed a farmstead with smoke and a woman's song drifting from an open door, and his heart knocked against that sound like a boy against a locked chest. He did not stop. To stop was to be taken by men who would do their duty because they believed in it and in him, which would make their mercy worse. He ate dried beef with fingers that would not quite feel. The gift dwindled behind him. Pines gave way to birch, birch to oak, the trees taller, the earth fattening with fallen leaves and last year's grass. He crossed the last river at a ford where someone had tied a red ribbon to a snag of willow, a charm against bad luck, or an invitation to it. His mare's knees shook in the current. Ghost swam without sound, his pale head like a snow apple bobbing along. When he saw the broken-toothed towers of Winterfell lift from the plain, he thought he had imagined them. Steam unraveled from the earth where the hot springs bled their breath into the cold. Smoke rose from kitchens. A boy ran along the outer yard with a kite. It was not a dream. He felt the mare's stride change under him, her body recognizing home because his did. The gatehouse guards shouted and then fell silent as if wind had blown the words from their mouths. John drew back his hood and their faces softened and stiffened in the same moment, like wax held too near a flame. "John," one said, and then remembered himself and added, "My lord." The second word hung in the air, a question that the stone listened to. Maester Luwin came down from his tower at a brisk shuffle, robes pinned up, the ring and rod of his chain clicking together. He had always smelled of ink and iron and the faint, medicinal rot of herbs. He stopped a pace from John and peered up as if the sight might change if he looked at it square. "Your hair has grown," he said at last, as though this mattered. Then, "You have done what you could not help, perhaps." "I have done what I chose," John said, and heard in it the boy still arguing with the man he wanted to be. "They will call you deserter," Luwin murmured, and the way he spoke was not censure but the reaching out of a hand to an edge that had to be tested. "I am an old man. I am in the habit of stating what things are. I will be called worse before the end," John said. He looked past the maester to the great keep. Somewhere in there was the godswood, and beneath, the crypts where a line of stone men with stone wolves waited out a winter older than memory. "Where are they?" "In the great hall," Luwin said. "Bran has been hearing disputes with Ser Roderick. He suspects it is the most tedious work in the world and therefore the most important." A grin came and went across John's face. "It is." He left Ghost at the foot of the dais. The direwolf lay and watched him with a red, unsleeping gaze. The great hall's air had the smell of smoke and roast onions and old rushes. People were standing in clots, whispering like thickets of sparrows shaken by a hawk's shadow. At the far end, Bran sat in the high seat with both hands on its arms as if to anchor himself. He had grown and he had not grown. The boy was thinner, his mouth older. Rickon slumped beside him, a tangle of hair and sullen ferocity. Shaggy Dog lay sprawled at Rickon's feet, black as a hole in daylight. Ser Roderick Castle stood to one side with his whiskers bristling. When he saw Jon, he took a step forward and then another, as though he meant to embrace him, and remembered at the last that he was a sworn sword before he was a man. "Gods," he said softly. "Ghost of a ghost." Bran went white and then red. He pushed himself upright with effort and held out a hand that trembled. Jon came up the steps and went to one knee because his legs would not otherwise hold. He took Bran's hand and kissed it because he could not help himself. "You should not be here," Bran said fiercely and quietly, and his eyes filled. "You should absolutely be here." Rickon made a rough, hurt sound and launched himself like a small, furious boar. Jon caught him. The boy smelled of earth and wolf and the kitchens, and he was solid, a weight you could lift and know you would not drop unless the world tipped. Jon buried his face in Rickon's hair just for a breath, then set him down before the hall could see him weep. Later, in the solar with the shutters half-latched against the wind's thin blade, they ate bread and cheese while Luwin talked and Ser Roderick listened. The old knight's hands were thick and square. His mercy was to pretend not to see how Jon's fingers quivered when he cut the bread. "Robb has called the banners and gone to join the Tully host," Ser Roderick said. The great Jon roared him up like a hearth. Karstark rides grim behind him. Lord Umber swore he'd rip a man in half who called the boy anything but lord. "Your brother leads from the front because he does not know any other way to lead. Robb will need Winterfell behind him," Jon said. "He will need a north that is more than a list of names on a raven's wing." Luwin's brow wrinkled with thought. "Winterfell has stood," he said. "But standing is not enough, perhaps." Jon set his palms on the table. The light from the fire moved in the wolf's head of Longclaw's pommel. "I came to claim Winterfell," he said, and the word claim made the air change, as if they had crossed a threshold only stones knew the names of. "Not for myself, for the Starks. If the North is to hold, a Stark must sit where a Stark has sat since there were thrones to sit. I have no right and all the right in the world. I will guard this hall and these children with my life. I will hold judgment. I will call men to harvest and to war. I will write to Lord Manderly for grain and to Lord Serwyn for iron. I will send Ser Roderick to pull our garrisons tight along the White Knife and the Marsh Road. I will kiss the weirwood and tell the dead that their stone watch will not be in vain." He paused. "If you will have me." Bran's mouth moved. He looked at his hands, then up at his brother. "A bastard cannot be lord," he said, as if reciting a wisdom he had been forced to swallow and found it bitter. "But a bastard can be brother. Father would have wanted a Stark at Winterfell. He would have wanted us to live. If you are sworn to the wall—" "I am," Jon said, and the truth lay like a brand on his tongue. "I am sworn, and I have broken it." Luwin sighed from somewhere behind his chain. "There is law, and there is custom, and there is need," he said. "The gods see closer than men. I am too small for their judgment." His eyes were damp. "My counsel is this. Do what keeps these children alive and Winterfell standing. We will write to your brother and ask his will. Until he answers, there is work." Jon bowed his head. The weight of the word he had said, claim, settled on his shoulders like a mantle cut from night. He had worn mantles before, a cloak, a duty, a name. This one was colder and heavier and perfectly his size. In the gods wood he knelt in the stealing dusk. The heart tree's face was white and slick as bone, its eyes pitched deep like old wells. The air smelled of wet iron and long leaves. Ghost went in circles, uneasy, and then lay circling the pool like a guard set by a spirit. Jon pressed his palms to the earth and spoke very softly, the way a man speaks to his own blood when he thinks he is beyond hearing. He told the old gods what he had done and what he intended to do. He told them he had chosen one hunger and starved another, and that he knew the starved thing would come snarling in dreams. The weirwood said nothing. The branches shifted, scraping against each other like 1,000 small bones. The pool held the sky and did not spill it. He rose with moonlight on his hair and went to work. The ravens flew. The smiths hammered iron into shapes men could tie to their courage. The men drilled in the yard until lungs hurt and curses ran thin. Jon walked the walls at dawn and dusk, learning the voices of the stones, the slurred places, the piles of snow where wind had a habit of dozing, the cracks that might invite a careful sword. He learned which of the kitchen girls could coax secrets from grooms and which of the groom boys could be bribed with apple tarts. He learned that one of the garrison had been stealing small coins a long time and did nothing but arrange for the man to overhear that thieves often went missing in winter. The man found religion and stopped stealing. Rickon came to the yard every day to throw short spears at a painted target. He shouted and scowled and hugged Shaggy Dog until the direwolf growled and then hugged harder. Bran watched from the steps, thin hands folded on his lap, eyes older than his face. Sometimes in the night Bran woke screaming from a dream of falling. Jon would go to him and sit and tell him a story about a boy in the Skagos Hills who wrestled a goat and lost, or a ranger who cut his boot by accident so his toes would remember him even when he was far. In the telling, he became their father's son again for a little. Ser Rodrik rode out with 24 men to Hornwood and Serwyn and to Lord Tallheart at Torrhen Square, to tell them a Stark sat at Winterfell. Osha watched him go with her head cocked like a bird hearing thunder at light. Bolton women braid ribbons in their hair when a man hangs, she said to Jon unasked. Pretty as a spring bird. North is full of pleasant habits like that. Do you know much of the Boltons? Jon asked. Enough to know a flayed man's skin takes to dye better than leather, Osha said. Old stories walk south of the wall same as north. When a man enjoys hurt, he makes a god of it. Jon thought of Roose Bolton at the War Council in the Great Hall at Winterfell the winter before, a pale man with little hair and less blood in view. He thought of the Dreadfort and the rumors that clung to it like smoke. Tell me if you hear anything that moves like rats but isn't, he said. Osha grinned. You'll be the second to know. 3 weeks after Jon's return, a small party came up the King's Road under a rag of banner that meant peace if you were willing to risk it. The sun had an edge to it that day, a knife with lace on the handle. Jon watched from the wall as they trotted in. A handful of men in strange, low helmets, the iron scuffed and salt-flecked as if it had been dredged from a harbor. The man who led them pulled off his helm and shook his hair. He smiled up at the walls with all the hungry brightness of a boy who believed he could still be liked by the place that had made him. Theon Greyjoy rode into the yard with 3 Ironborn and a boy who looked like a rabbit that had survived a lion by living under it. Wex, yes, he had been around Winterfell before, quiet, quick. The Ironborn halted in the shadow of the Great Keep and tried not to show how they wanted to spit on the stones. Theon dismounted and stood with an ease so practiced it had grown roots. Well, he said, Winterfell. Greyjoy, Ser Rodrik said beside Jon. His whiskers bristled as if at a scent only cats could sense. Theon's smile ticked wider. Ser Rodrik, your whiskers have seeded a field. He turned his face to Jon like a man turning to a fire after the sea has soaked him. And Jon Snow, didn't think to find you here. Your brothers swore you to stories and smoke. Things change, Jon said. He was aware of Ghost behind him like a question with teeth. He saw Theon take that in, weigh, and put it aside as if setting a coin where he might pick it up later. We come in peace, Theon announced louder, for the yard. I bring a message from my father to Robb Stark, or his nearest. Balon Greyjoy would speak to the north as one king to another. The word king is a dangerous toy, Ser Rodrik said mildly. It cuts. Theon's smile thinned but held. We can all count our fingers when we're done. Greyjoy asks parley. He lifted a hand in mock ceremony. He sends also a warning. The sea is shallow here, and so are some men's graves. Jon went down the steps and crossed the yard, every eye on him like spears that had not chosen where to fall. He stopped a sword's length from Theon. He could smell salt and oil on him, the honest stink of sea and the less honest stink of pride. You were our brother, Jon said quietly. That is not a message. That is a truth. What is your father's message? Theon shifted in the measure of a breath. His eyes, green as broke bottle glass, flicked to the wolf at Jon's heel and back. He bids that the North keep its swords at home, he said. He would take the Lannisters' gold if it bleeds like any man's, but he sees better profit on shores with weak men and poor locks. He offers you a bargain, bastard, words said softly around a driftwood fire. The Ironborn will trouble the south of your land, and you will not mourn too loudly. In return, he will trade you fish for bread when winter tightens.
Ser Rodríguez Nortez.
He offers us his hand after he robs our pantry. Magnanimous. Theon's smile flashed. If I came to spit, I'd spit with friends at my back. You came to look, Jon said, and Theon's gaze told him he had guessed right. The Ironborn were counting walls and men, gates and habits. Theon was counting faces. My father sent me because he remembers I lived here, Theon said lightly. He imagines I might recall where the corridors break themselves in storms, or which old men like to drink standing up. He imagines wrong. Does he? Jon asked. Theon's eyes flared, just a fraction. He does not know me so well as he thinks, he said, and in that small confession was all the bruise of a boy not looked in the face enough by the man who sired him. Stay the night, Jon said. Eat our bread, drink our ale, warm your men. In the morning, I will give you a letter to take to Robb. He let his voice carry a little, not to show power but to hand it around like a cup. And I will give you my word to yours. If Ironborn raid our people, we will answer. You know what that means well enough. Theon's mouth tilted, not quite a smile.
Ido.
Your blood runs true, bastard. It does, Jon said, and so does yours. That night he had Theon's men given quarters in the lower barracks and posted a double watch on the kitchen doors and the postern gate by the bee-yard. He set ghosts to sleep outside Theon's chamber because no man with sense argued with a wolf's sense, and Theon had sense, at least of certain kinds. He sent Wex to the kitchens with a message for Osha to watch the boy. He slept for 2 hours and woke at the scrape of leather outside his door, and when he opened it he found Theon there with a goblet in his hand and a careful casualness like a blade slipped into a boot. Come, Theon said quietly, tilting his head toward the rookery. We should speak where the walls are deaf. They went up together. The stairs were cold and close and smelled of old feathers and old decisions. In the rookery, Theon set his cup on the sill and looked out into the black yard. Did you ever wonder what we are to them? He asked without looking back. Men like your Lord Serwyn, your Tallheart, your Hornwood, men with their names nailed to doors they've owned since they invented doors. Are we sons? Are we a chapter they can turn if the page sours? I have wondered. My father wonders so loudly you can hear it through the floor. Jon stood with his hands on the rail. He could feel the wall in his bones even here, which was nonsense. I have wondered, he said. He felt Theon's surprise like a hand upon the shoulder. I am what I am because of a woman's grief and a man's mercy, Jon said. I have slept in the Lord's hall and eaten from their table. I have also felt their pity like a wet cloak. I will not allow pity to write my future. You mean to write it yourself? Theon said. And at last there was admiration in his voice and envy and something like relief. I mean to do my duty, Jon said. I mean to do it with my name unburned and my brothers alive. Theon took up his cup and finished it in a swallow that might have been courage. Then hear my truth, he said softly, and looked not at Jon but at the shadow of a raven stretched long on the wall. My father means to take your west coast. He will send raiders to the stony shore, to see Dragon Point, to Deepwood Motte if he thinks he can make a boast of it. He sent me to see if Winterfell can be plucked like a goose while the cocks fight elsewhere. If I tell him no, he will not believe me. If I tell him yes, he will not send me to do it. He will send Asha. He will send Dagmar. He will send men who do not have the taste for your hall that I do. Jon heard the shape under the words. I did not come to betray you, or perhaps I did and I cannot any longer. He weighed Theon and his pride and his hunger for place, for a man's regard. He heard Aemon's voice. Every path is a hunger. If you warn me, Jon said, you betray your father. Theon smiled without mirth. Aye, and if I do not warn you, I betray the years I spent here learning to love your stones. Many men betray one thing to keep another, Jon said. I cannot judge you for wanting a place to stand. He turned to face Theon fully. "Stay." Theon blinked. The torches guttered. The birds hunched and muttered. "You joke." "Stay," Jon said again. "Say your father has need of you elsewhere. Say what you like to him. But stay. Be my brother in truth. You know these coasts. You know the smell of a ship's thought. If Balon Greyjoy comes, I need a man beside me who understands the sea." Theon's laugh was small and sharp. "You want me to claim a hearth against a father who thinks I never learned to use one. I want to give you the choice to be loved where you are," Jon said. "I will not promise you land I cannot grant. I promise you bread, the truth to your face, place to stand, and the chance to earn what you would." Theon looked out into the night. Somewhere a watchman coughed. A dog barked and was told to be silent. After a time Theon said, "I have lived my life at the edges of things, Jon Snow. Maybe I am tired of edges." He sighed. "I cannot stay. Not now. If I do, my father will send knives and call them names." He raised a hand as Jon's jaw tightened. "But I can do this. I will ride to Torrhen Square first. I will warn Lord Tallheart. I will take the long way to Pike and the longer way back again with whatever message you give me. If my father sends raiders before I return, you will have days you did not have before. If he does not, you will have a promise in your hand that looks like a Greyjoy's name written in a Stark's ink." It was not enough. It was a great deal. Jon nodded once. "I will write. Tell Robb what you told me." Theon's smile came back, thinner and truer. "Write Robb," he said. "The boy I remember would like to have the choice to forgive me." He hesitated. "And, Jon, if I do not return, do not hate me more than is useful. I will probably deserve it." When he was gone, Jon went to the solar and wrote by candlelight until the wax stung his skin. He wrote to Robb with the words a brother uses when there is no time to be boys. He wrote to Wyman Manderley and asked for grain and ships to guard White Harbor better than pride could. He wrote to Lady Donella Hornwood and bid her bring her people into closer shelter. He wrote to Helman Tallheart to hold Torrhen Square, but to send his small folk to Winterfell if the horizon began to scowl. He wrote to Roose Bolton because courtesy was a blade too. He wrote to ask for riders and sent the letter by a man he would not weep to lose. In that letter he wrote nothing he was not ready to have read aloud to enemies. The first Ironborn raiders came 5 days after Theon left. They hit a fishing village on the White Knife, took 6 girls, and burned a house with an old man in it because he had shouted from the roof that the sea was a salt swamp for cowards. They left footprints like insults all down the sand. Jon sent 2 swift hunting parties north and south along the bank, not to fight but to follow and learn the boat's habits. He sent Ser Rodrik with 30 to guard the ferry at Molestown and told him flatly to slit any unfamiliar throat that smiled too readily. Ser Rodrik nodded once and went. News came like hail. A pitted rush of small pains that bruised and then did not. Raiding at Stony Shore. Smoke on Sea Dragon Point. A ship sighted off Bear Island and then not sighted again because the Mormont women had shot it to kindling and fed it to the same sea that had borne it. The letter from Robb came at last, lines sharp with hurry and with love. "Hold Winterfell in my name," Robb had written. "I do not question you, Jon. The North is ours. Keep it." Maester Luwin read it twice as if words might heat in his hands and change shape. He looked at Jon over the parchment, and his face was both hungry and full. "You are Castellan," he said, "by the Lord's hand." "I am a man with a long knife and not enough sleep," Jon said. But he took the parchment and rolled it very carefully and put it away where his heart might have kept it if that had been a safe place. From the Dreadfort came a letter that had the precise, blank smell of a bed where no one had ever lain. Lord Roose wrote in a hand so neat it seemed indifferent. He offered riders if needed, cautioned patience, approved of grain at White Harbor and of strong doors in bleak towns. He did not once use Jon's name. He used the word bastard once, as a clerk might note the weather. Jon sent back a courteous, empty letter and kept the polite chill of Bolton's words like a pebble in his boot that he forced himself to feel with every step. When trouble came at last, it did not come by sea. It came by land, and it came with a fox's eyes. Lady Donella Hornwood rode into the yard under gray sky with half her household strangled into a size that could be cinched and carried. Her furs were travel-stained, her cheeks whip-slapped by wind. She dismounted before a groom could catch her stirrup and went to Jon at the stair as if men were merely fences and she a river that already knew the way to sleep. "My lord," she said, and bowed as a lady bows to Winter, which is to say with respect and no expectation of mercy. "Bolton has sent men to take my woods. They come at night with torches. My small folk do not sleep. I have sent word twice to the Dreadfort and received twice bread that tasted of ash." Jon brought her to the hall and set hot drink at her elbow while she told a story that had too much in it that everyone in the hall had heard before. Ramsay Snow, she said without saying his name, was collecting stray dogs and stray men and showing them how alike they were. Men had gone missing. Mangled horses had been found tied to trees, the knots in their reins the work of fingers that took joy in repetition. A boy had been skinned at his heel and set running like a rabbit in a circle because he had taken an apple, and his father had watched because someone held a blade to his wife's throat and told him to find the humor in it. Jon did not let his throat change when the hall stirred. He had known this would come. The North had always made room for wolves and for men who liked to be wolves. This time there was no Robb at Winterfell whose name could call 1,000 spears in one morning. There was a bastard with a long knife and a wolf at heel. "We will ride," he said when Lady Hornwood was done. "Not to raid, to cut out rot."
Se Rudrix Whiskers Playa.
"There are laws for this," he murmured. "There are also laws the king pretends to and laughs in wine into his sleeve." "I know," Jon said quietly. "I will not pretend. If this is Bolton, then he will know who it is that answers." They rode at dawn under a sky like bark. The men wore dark leather. The horses breathed steam and kept their secrets. Jon took 70, enough to be rude, not enough to be boastful. He left 20 under Harwin to guard the road behind them and to fetch help if the White Horizon decided to move. He left instructions with Luwin that if he did not return within 10 days, a raven should fly to White Harbor and to Torrens Square and then to every small heart that had ever beaten warmer at the word Stark. Ghost ran ahead in a line of white that was also absence. Osha rode beside Jon on a shaggy mare that had opinions about the world and expressed them in a language of ear flicks and tail. "You mean to skin a man," she said cheerfully. "Not literally, I hope. That takes practice." "I mean to stop a man," Jon said. "Stopping men like that is like stopping the tide," Osha said. "No one minds the tide when it's got a good ship under it. It's when it changes its mind mid-harbor you learn to pray." They found the first of the Bolton men sleeping like men who believed no one would dare wake them. 3 around a low fire with a 4th sitting up, eyes slitted, chewing smoked meat as if he had been born chewing. He went for his knife and then for his whistle. Osha put an arrow through his wrist so cleanly it looked as if she had meant to sew something there. The other 3 died with the expressions of men who had expected to die somewhere else. By mid-afternoon, they had 3 prisoners with them. Men with pale eyes and little humor, their skins marked with old welts shaped like laughter. Jon questioned them and learned everything he had expected to learn. That they had come at the behest of the bastard at the Dreadfort, that they were to make Lady Hornwood's lands lean, that they were to take any girls who looked sturdy enough to carry wood and bear insult. One of them spat at Jon's boots. Ghost stood with his head a little to one side and then put his teeth very gently around the man's calf. The man screamed like something had turned him inside out. Ghost let go. The man spoke with care thereafter. At twilight, they came to an old hunter's lodge under a stand of black pines and smelled meat and smoke and rot. There were horses, too fine by half for the men who had them. There were dogs, a lot of them too lean, too eager. The lodge had been a place where the wind had always found some song to sing. Now the song was a rasp. Osha's lips peeled back. "Stink," she said. Jon dismounted and went forward with Ghost at his knee. The yard had ruts filled with a greasy melt. A man came out onto the step with a knife in his hand and the look of someone who had been drinking boredom and had now discovered a better ale. He was small across the shoulders and tidy as a clerk. His smile was wrong, as if something had been miscopied long ago and he had never bothered to have it corrected. Visitors, he said brightly. Only call me Reek, or I'll be shy. Jon held his gaze. I will call you what you are when I am sure what that is. Ah, the man sighed. We're all waiting to discover that. Titles are such delicate jackets. He tilted his head. You must be the bastard. I have smelled you in rumors. You smell of snow and a mistake. Bring out your men, Jon said. Lay down your arms. If you do, you will live to do whatever your kind call living. If you do not, I will hang you, and I will not untie the noose if you cry prettily. Reek clapped his hands as if he had been given a surprising gift. Threats, he said. Books should be full of them. Well then. He whistled, and men appeared at windows, behind the dogs, in the shadows of the shed. Not too many. Enough if Surprise loved them. Not enough if Surprise was taken out behind the lodge and beaten. Jon raised his hand. Arrows whispered. 3 of Reek's men fell from the windows like cut curtains. Ser Rodrik took the yard with the steady, merciless patience of a man sweeping a floor he had swept for 40 years. Osha put a second arrow in the same wrist she had put an arrow into the night before because she had a sense of humor that was mostly about symmetry. Reek ducked back through the door as Ghost cleared the steps in a white flash. There was a noise inside like kitchen pans crashing and men who had not expected to be on the floor discovering they were. Jon went in after him. The lodge smelled of fat and fear. A long table had been set with meat and cups and a girl bound to a chair with a sausage stuck between her teeth, so that she would not bite her tongue when someone hurt her in a way that made other men laugh. Ghost took the man untying her by the shoulder and worried him like a rag. Jon went for Reek. They met in a narrow passage where the floor had been warped by damp. Reek's knife moved like a whisper with a hook in it. Jon took a cut across the ribs that felt hot and then cold and then like it had always been there. He put Longclaw's hilt into Reek's mouth with a weight that cracked something delicate. Reek dropped the knife and spat a tooth and a noise that sounded like apology if you had been born wrong. He scrambled for another blade. Jon kicked it away. Ghost's mouth closed on the man's calf and Reek's laugh was a high, careful thing like a child practicing a whistle. Ramsay Snow, Jon said, looking down, and said it not as a triumph but as the placing of a proper name on a map where there had been only a smudge. The man blinked, blood at his lips. Names, he said indistinctly. My father collects them. He will enjoy having yours. Alive? Jon said to Ser Rodrik when the old knight shouldered in behind him, breathing in armor like a bellows. We take him alive. They bound the bastard of Bolton with old rope that had seen honest work. They cut the girl free and put a cloak around her shoulders and a clean rag in her mouth so she could cry into something that did not get drunk on it. They killed 2 dogs and fed the rest because it was not the dogs' fault they loved a man who fed them cruelty. They buried the dead behind the lodge where the ground was soft and marked their graves with stones and the story of how they had died told in words straightforward as a fence post. On the ride back, Ramsay sang under his breath in a language that had never been spoken. Once he looked up at Jon with an interest that was almost courtesy. You have made a friend, he said cheerfully. He holds a flaying knife and writes letters with it. I should like to see the calligraphy when he drafts your eulogy. You will see your own grave first, Jon said. Ramsay laughed and bit at the rope around his wrists as if it amused him. When they brought him into the yard at Winterfell, Osha hissed like a wick lit too suddenly. Bran flinched. Rickon went hard and then shook, and Shaggydog's growl began in the yard and finished in the crypts. They put Ramsay in a cell under the older barracks, the one that had been for goats in the days when Winterfell was smaller and men remembered to be afraid of other things. He had straw and water and a piece of leather to chew. Jon did not speak to him again that day. He wrote instead to Roose Bolton a letter as even and pale as the man himself. Your son is in my custody after presiding over crimes on Lady Hornwood's lands. His men confessed as much as we needed to hear. I will hold him until such time as law may be done in the sight of your peers. Send riders if you wish to parley. Send honesty if you have any. Will he come? Bran asked that night, sitting close to the fire as if it shared secrets in a language only boys could hear. He will send someone, Jon said. Men like Bolton keep their own hands clean when there is filth to be gone through. 2 days later, a party came from the Dreadfort flying Roos's flayed man and a white banner beneath it as if to argue that the one cancelled the other. The leader was a thin man with a sensible face and unreadable eyes. He bowed more correctly than Roos might have liked. "I am Steelshanks Walton," he said, and John had to admire any man who allowed others to speak his name aloud without putting a jest on it. "Lord Bolton sends greetings. He sends also his regrets that a man has used his name to do harm. He says he has always found the Hornwoods good neighbors." "Lord Bolton has always found whatever is convenient," Sir Roderick muttered. John kept his face as polite as the letter he had sent. They brought Walton to the cell. Ramsay was sitting with his back to the wall, humming something only he liked. "Snow," Walton said with the level weariness of a soldier who had been told the thing he had to do might take more time than he had patience for. "You have brought shame on a great house." "I have removed rot," John said. Walton looked from one bastard to the other and found, to his credit, very little difference. "Lord Bolton offers to take him into his custody for judgment," Walton said. "No," John said. Walton blinked. "No." "I will judge him here," John said. "A lady came under my roof and asked for my protection. The crimes were done in my lands. I will not send it away to be put to sleep where it cannot be seen." Walton went very still, like a pond when stones stop skipping. "Lord Bolton will take offense." "Lord Bolton has made offense a hobby," John said, and his voice had the flat quiet of stone. "He may add my name to any list he keeps." Walton studied him a heartbeat longer than was strictly respectful. "Very well," he said at last. "I imagine you will perform the sentence yourself." "Yes," John said, "as my father taught me." Word went to the houses whether John wanted it or not. Men came and women came to stand in the yard and see whether a Stark would hang a Bolton when a Bolton deserved it. The byres and the steps and the walls were full. Snow fell without committing to it. Ramsay was brought to the block in chains and with a look of delight, the way a man looks at a feast he believes cannot possibly be poisoned. John stood with Longclaw's hilt fitting his hand as if it were his hand. He had bathed and dressed plain. He had spoken to Bran and Rickon. He had said nothing that could be misremembered as cruelty. He looked at Ramsay and saw a man who had put laughter in hurts and was now looking for it again. He looked at the men on the walls and saw Theon standing quiet among them with his face set toward something only he knew. He saw Osha lean as if to hear the snow. He saw Maester Luwin's hands holding the corners of his robe like a man holding together the last decency of a day. "Ramsay Snow," John said, and the name hummed in the yard like a plucked string. "You stand accused of theft of small folk, murder, and brutality so repeated it might claim to be habit if habit could be pride. Do you have a word to say before judgment?" Ramsay smiled. "I have a word," he said. "It is flay." John nodded once, as a man nods when a stone is truthfully described as a stone. He looked at the weirwood beyond, at the red leaves that had seen men do things worse and better than this. He looked at the block. "The law is death," he said softly. "Kneel." Ramsay did not kneel. He made the guards force him and made a joke of their hands on his shoulders. He laid his head down lightly like a man who has heard a lullaby. John stepped forward and the yard went very still. He brought Longclaw down cleanly. The snow accepted what it was offered and did not refuse it. The head rolled with awful grace and came to rest with the face turned up as if to watch the clouds. There was no cheer. There was a long breath and the sound of a woman beginning to cry because she could. John wiped the blade and did not look at the eyes again. That night, Theon knocked at his door very softly and came in without waiting for permission because he had always been like a cat with doors. He leaned against the wall and exhaled. "You made a lord today," he said. John looked up. "Of whom?" "Of yourself," Theon said, and for once there was nothing of grin or knives in it. "The North will talk. It will say a bastard did what a lord would not, which is to say something a lord should have done, if a lord had remembered how to be one." He scratched at his chin as if searching for a beard that had taken offense and left. My father will send more men. He will call you impudent and hope the wind carries the word to your bread and sours it. Roos will fold your name into his smiles like a hare into a sweet. The phrase will whisper to the walls. But the small folk will tell this story around fires where their children pretend not to listen. And that is the only court whose memory is worth much. I did what I must, Jon said. Theon shrugged one shoulder. King's work, that. He laughed quietly at his own gall, then grew serious again in the same breath. I ride at dawn, he said. To Pike. Send me with a song in my hand, Jon Snow. Something to sing when my father tries to make me deaf with his pride. Jon went to the desk and took up a letter he had not sealed. He pressed wax to it now and stamped it. Tell your father that Winterfell will not be plucked, he said. Tell him we will trade with Fair Isle and White Harbor and Bear Island and never with men who steal our girls. Tell him if he takes Deepwood Motte, I will take it back from his bones. Tell him I said that politely. Theon grinned, and for a moment he was the boy who had stolen apples and insisted he was testing the cook's temper. I will, he said. He tucked the letter into his breast. He looked at Jon a beat longer. And tell Robb I am sorry? You tell him, Jon said. Theon went, and the door banged lightly behind him, like a friend not wanting to wake anyone. What Jon had done had consequences that did not wait for snow to cover them. Roose Bolton's next letter was more polite and more distant, enough so that you could feel the distance as a practice thing. It did not threaten. It did not promise. It said merely that the Dreadfort had always kept its peace with Winterfell and intended to continue to do so. It invited Jon to dine when the snows were gone, to taste a wine the Lord had been given by a Lannister years ago and had never found occasion to drink. Jon read it twice and then held it over the candle until the wax bubbled and blackened and the letters turned to ash he could rub into his palm until his lines looked unclean. Robb's next letter came with a smear of blood on the edge where the carrier had cut his thumb climbing something he should not have. Robb wrote of battles and of councils that were battles made of bread instead of iron. He wrote of the great Jon and of Karstark's temper turning like milk. He did not write of becoming king. Jon read between the lines and read restraint and the price it charged. Catelyn Stark's letter followed. Unexpected, like a bird at a window you did not know was there. Her script had a measured beauty. She wrote nothing of Jon's birth and everything of Jon's choice. She thanked him without saying thank you because they were both too proud for that. She asked after Bran and Rickon in a paragraph that became the heartbeat under the page. She wrote, Hold Winterfell, and meant it like a prayer that was not a request but a remembering of what had always been. The winter town filled. Fires burned like islands in a dark sea. Men began to use the words cold and season differently. Jon walked the walls and sent grain to the storehouses and took petitions from men whose cows had stopped calving and from women whose husbands had gone south for love of a cause and were late in returning. He judged a dispute between two brothers over a strip of land so thin you could not have laid a child sideways upon it. He gave it to the steadier of the two and gave the other man a job in the storerooms that kept him tired enough to scowl less. He sent riders to Bear Island to help their women with axes that had become too heavy because sons had gone to war. He sent letters to Manderley that flattered wit and numbers by turns. He built a stockade beyond the main gate where hawkers could sell meat and knives and omen charms, because no army feeds itself on pride. He did the work that looks like nothing until it is not done and then looks like the end of the world. And still the sea was a thorn. The raiders came regardless of letters and of Theon's delay, because fathers and uncles kept their own counsels. Jon sent men to learn the shape of the currents and to speak with the fishermen who knew the moods of water the way some men know the moods of wives. Osha slept one night in an old stone tower on the stony shore and came back with sand in her hair and a grin like a cut. I took a knife, she said proudly, from a man who thought I didn't have one. He won't think again. It would have been a livable winter if not for the next raven. It flapped down at noon, mad with cold and haste, its claws raking the maester's wrist as if to hurry his reading. The seal was black with the simple stamp of a crowned stag that had been poorly cut. The letter inside was brief as an arrow. King's Landing had burned. Blackwater Bay had eaten Stannis Baratheon's hope and spat it back at him in green fire. Tywin Lannister had ridden to the rescue of his grandson with half a river's worth of iron at his back. The war was not over. It had merely learned to endure. In the wake of that, men moved like wolves hearing a shot in the woods. Walder Frey felt the wind and adjusted his joints to it. Roose Bolton wrote lighter letters. Robb wrote letter after letter and sent them like a man throwing ropes across a broken bridge. And Jon read them and answered and did not tell the boy between the lines that he could feel the water underfoot. The choice came in the form of an old law guessed right. It was as cruel as any blade when wielded by men who did not mean it. Robb would pass the twins on his return to the north. He had broken faith with Walder Frey's daughter and wedded Jane Westerling under a roof that had never meant him harm. He had done it for love or hurt or a stubbornness that wore the same face as honor if you met it in the dark. Walder Frey had not forgiven. The Riverlands stirred like fish in a bucket a boy had suddenly remembered he owned. Catelyn wrote a letter that had blood in the ink though none had spilled. She asked for counsel because it was what she had left that did not burn her fingers. Jon read all of it and went to the Godswood. He knelt and told the old faces that boys were boys until the world made them otherwise and that sometimes the world forgot to issue a warning. He rose with his mind made and sat long with Maester Luwin setting down words. He wrote to Manderley and to Serwyn and to Umber and to Karstark, though Karstark was no longer a friend to boys who reminded him of sons. He wrote to those in the Riverlands whose names were not banners but had more weight than that. Men who owned ferries and men whose daughters had carried water at the Trident and had not cried. He asked for witnesses. He asked for eyes. Then he wrote to Walder Frey, Lord of the Crossing. The letter went, written in a hand even and unlovely. You hold the river as if it were a blade. It will cut you too if you forget where the edge lies. I remind you of the old laws and of the stories wet nurses tell to children when they do not sleep. I send to you men whose eyes will count how often your bread is broken and in whose sight your salt is lifted. If my brother is harmed under your roof by your word or your thought, the North will never sleep. Your grandchildren will walk with knives in their pockets and your boys will grow old learning to start at shadows. If nothing is done, the North will come to you with harvest in trade. If wrong is done, the North will come to you as winter comes. We forget nothing. I write this politely. He sent the letter by 6 messengers, 2 who would arrive and make a show of it and 4 who would arrive at the poor gate and say nothing at all. He sent Osha south to the crossroads with money for small men and quiet women, and Ser Roderick went with her because a knight with whiskers that bristled like spears was exactly the sort of old honesty that made servants speak. He sent Theon, returned at last from Pike with a face leaner and lonelier but alive, west with a purse and a question. What do the Ironborn hear on the waves that men do not? Theon went because that was something he could almost answer. Robb came to the twins beneath a sky bruised with cloud. He crossed. He ate bread and salt at Walder Frey's table. He did not die there. There were words no one would repeat, and a bargain that was half threat and half weary mercy. Robb agreed to send 300 men to guard a Frey bride on her way to a marriage that would be made as if it were a peace treaty. He agreed to let Lord Frey's pride strut until it had tired itself. He agreed because he had no coin to pay for his mistake except humility, and humility never bought as much as you hoped. Still, it bought his life. Walder Frey wrote to Winterfell afterwards, a letter that slithered on the page with oily good humor. There was no stain on it that you could prove belonged to anyone's blood. Jon read it in the hall with Bran and Rickon and the men whose eyes had learned to expect ill and found it interesting to be wrong for once. He folded it and put it away and looked at the boys. You will not remember this as the worst winter, he said, and it was both comfort and warning. Ravens came from the wall at last, not in the panic of one, but in a ragged little squadron like men escaping a town after a fire has run through it. Jeor Mormont's hand was square on the page. The letters had been scratched more quickly than the old bear liked to write. He spoke of dead things moving and of a king on the wrong side of the world with no ears for the cold. He spoke of Corran half-hand gone and of a boy in the mountains who had carried messages like flickers of fire through a snow that did not end. He did not ask for men. He did not ask for pardon for any boy who had been missed from roll call when the ravens were fed. He told the North what it had always known and had tried to forget, that there were worse kings than boys in Mael and worse wars than those between men. Jon slept poorly that night and woke with a decision in his mouth like a tooth he had not noticed come loose. He went to Maester Luwin's tower in the gray before dawn and watched the Maester grind ink. Luwin did not look surprised or sad when Jon said what he meant to say. He merely nodded and asked how many men and by which road and how long the grain could stand against the cold. He spoke softly to Bran when the boy sat to break his fast, and Bran nodded and chewed and did not speak for a time. Rickon threw a crust at Shaggy Dog, who caught it and spat it because bread was not meat. There were tears later, but they were not loud. Jon's promises were not either. He named Ser Roderick Castellan for the days he would be gone and Osha captain of the scouts because men would think twice before they laughed at a woman who had walked the haunted forest and had not come back mad. He put Theon in charge of the River Watch, and the Ironborn wore that duty like a new skin that chafed until familiarity smoothed it. He took 30 men he trusted to ride hard and not ask questions. He wrote to Robb, and the letter was like a conversation. I go because I must and because I am the man you would forgive when he has to. I go because my oath has teeth and has not stopped biting. Hold the Riverlands. Hold your temper. Hold your mother's hand when she allows it and trust her when she does not. Hold Winterfell in your heart as I will hold it in my dreams until I return. He rode north with Ghost and with men who had learned to move like silence. The wind sang in the trees and then forgot the words and then remembered them again. They crossed the White Knife where it ran slow and sullen under a bridge that had seen more hooves than it liked. They went up into the land the cold had drawn closer to itself, tighter and tighter as if it meant to swallow everything. They found men on the road heading south in 2s and 3s and a family with a cart whose one wheel had split like a skull. Jon gave them 2 horses and told them to keep the smaller one warm with blankets and wine if they could. He took nothing in return because what he took he would have broken. At the Shadow Tower he found men whose eyes had the look you see in a candle that has burned to its last inch. A wavering and a determination. They stared at him and then looked away because they did not know if the word for him was traitor or savior or Stark. He did not teach them a word. He gave the commander grain and the meat they carried and told him what he knew of the world men had been pretending was far away. The man behind the table grunted. We always liked the Starks when they minded their wall, he said. Then you will like us again, Jon said. If I live. He took the King's Road through wood that no longer made jokes. The trees leaned together. The sky was a lid. They found 3 dead men between trees who had gone a strange color and had no smell. Jon burned them carefully while the men watched and pretended not to be afraid. They did not speak while the smoke went up. After, one of the boys puked behind a rock and then came back and pretended he had slipped. At Castle Black the wall rose out of the earth like a decision made by giants. The yard was a mess of slush and men who had been sweating in furs. PYP stood with his mouth open and then shut it because he had never learned what to say when the world rearranged itself into the shape of a story. Gren shouted Jon's name once and then remembered and made a noise in his throat that was something else. Sam came down the steps like a man running toward something he had promised himself not to want. Jeor Mormont came out last, his black bear cloak a mountain about his shoulders. He looked at Jon a long time with a face that had been shaved to discipline and did not reveal much more. You took your time, he said. He gestured toward the hall. Come. Jon told him everything and nothing. He told him what needed to be said and left out the parts that belonged to boys in kitchens at midnight. Mormont listened and did not interrupt. When Jon had done, the old bear leaned back and set his hands on the table. I should take your head, he said simply. Yes, Jon said. Mormont nodded, a once deliberate and grave. I won't. He bared his teeth. You left your post and saved the only post that matters to the men who feed us and sew our shirts. You held Winterfell. You kept the North from tearing itself along a line a Lannister drew. That is more than some kings manage in a decade. You'll carry the guilt of it because you should. If we survive the winter, you can pay the rest of the price. I did not come for absolution, Jon said. You came because you're a Stark. Mormont said. A Stark is a promise someone else made and did not break. He grunted. We ride beyond the wall soon. The dead make armies of men who don't ask for pay. If you mean to help, then help. If you mean to go back to your warm halls and your wolf, then tell me now so I can find a softer name to call you when I drink. Jon thought of Bran and Rickon, of the old stones interrupted by hot springs that would not learn to be cold, of the yard and the way it filled with voices at supper as easily as a cup fills with ale. He thought of the girl at the lodge and how her eyes had looked after the rope was cut. He thought of Theon's laughter and of the man it tried to keep alive. He thought of Robb's letters and of Catelyn's hands on the page. I'll help, he said. They rode. The world beyond the wall was a choir of ice and the long bones of trees. Qhorin Halfhand was gone to Heroes' Smoke by then, and the stories about him were a net thrown into cold water in which men caught courage like fish. Ygritte's name was a sound men did not say near Jon because they could hear what it did in him. The wildlings moved like weather, and Mance Rayder had the look of a man who had finally become what he had threatened to become. Open your gates, he sent to the wall, or I will open them for you. Men argued about what that meant when the meaning was clear. Jon argued with himself more silently and more fiercely than that. They fought small fights that were practice for the one that mattered. They burned more than they buried. Jon took a spear cut and did not let it slow him because there were boys watching. Ghost took a wound across the shoulder and walked with a limp he pretended he did not have. They killed a bear that had gone the wrong color and had eyes like lanterns in a cave. It took 6 men and the rest of the courage. Ravens went south from the wall with letters bound tight to their legs and messages bound tighter to the things the men who wrote them did not say. Jon sent word to Ser Rodrik. Keep the boys inside the walls. Kill first anyone who comes with a story too common for truth. He sent word to Manderley. Send men north if you can. Send grain if you cannot. He sent word to Robb. Your war is not the only war and may not be the first one. He did not send word to Roose Bolton. He did not send word to Walder Frey. Those men would hear without ravens. In Winterfell, the sun rose and fell and the snow came and left and came. The yards rang with practice. Ser Rodrik's whiskers grew and were trimmed and grew again. Bran grew, Rickon grew, though in fits and starts that had more to do with rage than bread. Osha taught the men to listen to the forest by standing still until there he. RTS slowed. Theon stood on the walls and learned the names of the trees as if talking to them might teach him how not to be his father's son. He sang sometimes under his breath, the way men sing on ships when they do not want to tempt storms. He went down to the winter town and drank with 2 men who had once worked on docks at White Harbor and who taught him to throw a rope through a ring at a distance only pride set. He stopped making jokes when he did not need to and learned when he did. Roose Bolton did not come to Winterfell. He sat at Harrenhal for a time like a man waiting to see where the fly lands before he decides which hand to use. He kept the phrase close by looking at them the way a snake looks at a warmth it would like to share. He wrote letters and let them be intercepted and wrote more and sent them by ways that could not be. He learned Winterfell by the letters it wrote and the ones it did not. The winter deepened. The wall held because the men on it held, and because the dead were surprised to discover that men who had learned to live without much warmth could learn to kill without much fear. Jeor Mormont led as if he were bargaining with the winter itself, and sometimes it agreed. Once he stood on the gatehouse and roared something about old gods and new and goats and girls, and the men cheered, and the cheer rose up the ice and broke itself in 100 white shards that fell into the yard like a blessing. Jon fought until he forgot the names of days. He took orders without question and gave them with the same care as if he were counting out coins to a friend who gambled. He saw men die bravely and stupidly. He killed a man dressed in furs that smelled of pine and later found a lock of hair tied to a thong around the man's wrist and did not ask himself whose hair it had been. He slept with Ghost's head on his legs when there was sleep to steal, and he dreamed of Winterfell and of warm stone and of the sound of Bran's laugh in a corridor that had always known how to carry it. The worst of the winter broke like a fever. The wildlings fell back because they needed to eat. The dead did not fall back, but there were fewer of them, as if the anger that animated them had grown tired of finding the same reception. The nights were still colder than men liked, but they no longer feared that breath might freeze in their lungs if they laughed. Jeor Mormont let the men rest for a day and then began to plan the next foray, because men who stop moving in winter learn not to move at all. Jon sent a letter south with a bird that looked old and heroic. He wrote, "I will come home when I can." The word home had weight enough to bend the other words around it. When he did return at last, it was not triumphal and it was not sad. He rode in under a sky the color of old iron and smelled the kitchens and the hot pools and the old smoke. The gates looked taller. The boys looked older. Bran no longer looked to the side when he spoke to him. He looked dead on and did not blink as much. Rickon came flying with Shaggy Dog and hit him in the ribs with a force that made Jon grunt and then laugh.
Ser Rudrick Bua, whiskers on parada.
Osha nodded once. Maester Luwin cried and pretended he had something in his eye. Theon stood with his arms folded and his head cocked and said, "Took you long enough," and then took Jon by the forearm and squeezed once, as if they had both been drowning and had only just remembered you could use a grip as a rope. There was work waiting. There always was. There were raiders to hang and small men to pay and widows to comfort without lying in any way that would make comfort cheap. There were letters to read. Robb's latest said he had taken a crossing the way a man takes breath in the middle of a fight and that he meant to make good men keep it. He wrote that he could smell spring and did not trust it. He wrote that he still could not forgive himself for needing to write to Jon for counsel and still could not help doing it. Jon wrote back. He said, "Forgive yourself when the work is done. Men who forgive themselves at breakfast become monsters by supper." He said, "Trust your mother when she tells you the shape of a room before you step into it." He said, "If the Freys smile, count your spoons. If the Boltons smile, count your children." He said, "I will keep Winterfell if you keep the rest." Spring came with a kind of slyness, like a person you thought you knew showing a new face that you realized had always been there if you had only looked. The snows shrank, the roads unclodded. Men took off layers and remembered they had skin. The gods would put out leaves that shone like the varnished surface of a new table. The pools steamed more obviously. In the halls, laughter grew longer. There were still knives. There would always be knives. The Lannisters gnawed and smiled. The Freys practiced injuries the way pianists practice scales. Roose Bolton retreated to the Dreadfort and made the word retreat sound like advance. The sea let men think it had lost interest and then took a ship with girls on it whose mothers waited until their feet bled at the wharf. The wall held and so did the men upon it. But Winterfell had a Stark in it. Men said the words in markets and in beds and in places where they did not say anything else. They said bastard with a softness to it that surprised them. They said Jon as if it were a bow they had strung and were pleased to discover held true. The old kings in the crypts did not stir. They did not need to. Above them, a boy had chosen to become something else, and then he had become it, and then he had learned how to carry it as if it weighed nothing until he could put it down. He stood often in the gods' wood now and spoke to no one and to everyone. Ghost patrolled the edge of the pool like a white moon caught at ground level. Catelyn came to Winterfell in a thaw, the roads a lace of mud and melted snow. She rode with 2 guards and a woman who had known her since she bled first and never wasted time using the wrong words. She dismounted in the yard and looked up at the towers, and the breath left her as if someone had told her something she had already known. Jon went to her and bowed as if she were a queen, not because of crowns but because some griefs make crowns out of any head that bears them with dignity. "My lady," he said. She looked at him a long time, her face considering the shape of his nose and the line of his jaw, looking for the man who had made him and finding a ghost she could speak to only by knowing she would never speak to him again. "Lord," she said at last, barely audible, the smallest admission pride from a harboring pride. He did not pretend to misunderstand. He led her to the hall and found her a seat by the fire and did not try to fill the spaces with words. She spoke of Robb in measures. She spoke of Sansa and of Arya as if naming them into safety. She wept once, a sudden brief rain, and was embarrassed, and he pretended to be looking at the fire until she had finished. In the evening she went to the godswood and stood with him under the red leaves and closed her eyes and let the steam from the hot springs lift its small, consoling hands to her cheeks. "I never thanked you," she said then. "You do not need to. he said. "No," she agreed, "but I should, and so I do." He nodded and said nothing more, and she loved him a little for that and did not say so. That night, as Jon walked the walls, the stars were so sharp they looked as if they might cut a man who tried to seize them. Ghost paced ahead, pausing now and then to cast the invisible world that lay over the visible one. Down in the winter town, a woman laughed, and a man answered with something that was not a word but meant "I hear you." The wind had lost some of its iron and picked up faint scents from the south. Damp earth, the promise of things that expected to live. Jon felt the weight on his shoulders ease in a way he did not mistrust but did not name. He kept walking. A guard at the east postern hailed him, surprised and cheered as men always were when those who commanded them showed they remembered the feel of stone under their boots. "My lord," the man said, "quiet tonight." "For now," Jon said. He rested his hands on the parapet and looked at the dark that lay upon the land he had claimed not as a possession but as an oath. He thought of Eamon and of the night he had chosen. He thought of the road and of the fact that every path is a hunger. He had fed one hunger and starved another and found, to his astonishment, that the starved thing had not died. It breathed still. It would always breathe. "We'll be ready," he said to the wind, and the wind, which is older than kings and kinder than some, did not argue.